There is a document held in the archives of the South Carolina Historical Society that has no official description. It was cataloged in 1962 simply as Ledger, Origin Unknown, circa 1848. But the archivist who first opened it, a woman named Dr. Cecilia Marsh, who would spend the next 11 years studying its contents, wrote in her personal notes something that the official catalog does not record. She wrote, "I have never read anything that made me feel simultaneously that justice is possible and that it always comes too late." The ledger belonged to a man named Harlan Whitmore, plantation owner, cotton merchant, and deacon of the First Calvary Baptist Church of Charleston, South Carolina. Every entry in the ledger was written in Harlan Whitmore's hand, every calculation was verified by Harlan Whitmore's signature, and every column of figures in that ledger, 41 pages of meticulous, damning arithmetic, was the instrument of his own destruction. He didn't know that when he wrote it, but Solomon did. This is the testimony of Ada Clarke, formerly enslaved, age 11 at the time of the events described. Her account was given once to a single clerk in Charleston in 1851 and immediately sealed by order of the district court. It remained sealed for 111 years. She was the only witness to everything that happened on the Whitmore plantation in the winter of 1848. She described Solomon as a man who did not raise his voice, who did not move quickly, who understood with the patience of someone who had spent his entire life calculating the distance between what was and what could be, that the most dangerous weapon a man can possess is one his enemy built himself. This is the testimony of Ada Clarke. This is Solomon's debt, collected in full. This channel explores mysteries and hidden histories that the official record tried to bury. Cases that were suppressed, sealed, or deliberately forgotten because they challenged everything the people in power needed you to believe. Before we go further, hit subscribe. We release one deep investigation every week. Next week, we're going to a locked room in an Indiana orphanage in 1863, where no child ever aged past 10, and the records were sealed for 80 years. That investigation is already complete. The only question is whether you'll be here when we open it. Drop a comment. What state are you from? Because what happened in South Carolina might be closer to your family's history than you think. To understand what Solomon did, you have to understand who Solomon was before any of it happened. Ada Clarke described him in her testimony with the clarity of a child who had observed something she knew, even at 11, was worth remembering precisely. She said, "Solomon was the one who fixed things, not just machines, things that were wrong." His full name, insofar as he was permitted one, was Solomon Gaines. He was approximately 34 years old in the autumn of 1847. He had been the property of Harlan Whitmore since the age of 7, when his mother was sold separately at the Charleston market, and he was retained because, as the transaction record notes with the clinical efficiency that characterized the era's bookkeeping, he was of sound constitution and demonstrably quick comprehension. That phrase, demonstrably quick comprehension, was the one thing Harlan Whitmore ever said about Solomon that was entirely true. Solomon had taught himself to read from discarded newspapers and the backs of grain sacks. He had taught himself arithmetic by listening for years through the open window of Whitmore's study on summer evenings, while Whitmore's ledger clerk, a young man named Forsyth, who was drunk by 4 in the afternoon most days, read figures aloud in the process of transcribing them. By the time Solomon was 20, he could calculate in his head what took Forsyth 20 minutes with a pen. He never told anyone. He understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who has lived their entire life inside a system designed to destroy them, knowledge revealed is knowledge controlled. What they don't know you know is the only freedom you actually have. But there was one thing Solomon did not keep hidden, one thing he allowed himself openly. Her name was Mercy. She had been on the Whitmore plantation for 3 years before Solomon spoke more than 3 words to her. Ada Clarke, who observed everything and was small enough that adults forgot she was in rooms, described the way Solomon was around Mercy as like watching a man who had decided to be careful about something for the first time in his life. Mercy worked in the Whitmore house, cleaning, cooking, managing the household stores. She was, by all surviving accounts, possessed of a wit so sharp that even Harlan Whitmore, who did not notice the people around him unless they were causing him a problem, had been heard to laugh at something she said. She also kept a private account of the household stores in her memory. Every pound of flour, every jar of preserved peaches, every cut of salt pork, because the household records were maintained by Whitmore's wife, and Whitmore's wife was consistently, systematically wrong in ways that always seemed to disadvantage the people who worked in her kitchen. Mercy noticed. Mercy remembered. Mercy said nothing. Solomon noticed that Mercy noticed, and that was how they began. Ada Clarke described a specific evening in the summer of 1847. The heat had barely broken by 9 o'clock. Solomon and Mercy sat on the steps behind the kitchen house, not touching, speaking in voices low enough that Ada, 11 feet away, pretending to be asleep against the wall, could only catch fragments. She caught this one. Solomon said something, and Mercy laughed. Not the laugh she gave Whitmore, carefully measured and contained, but a different laugh, one that came from somewhere unguarded. And Solomon went quiet for a long moment after it, as if he was memorizing the sound. Ada Clarke said that was the moment she understood they belonged to each other. She said it in those exact words, to a clerk in Charleston in 1851. She was 11 years old. The clerk wrote it down. Harlan Whitmore was 52 years old in the autumn of 1847. He was a respected man. He sat in the third pew from the front at First Calvary Baptist. He had served 2 terms on the Charleston City Council. His cotton operation ran approximately 340 acres and held, depending on the season, between 60 and 80 enslaved people. He also ran, through a carefully constructed series of proxy transactions, a private lending operation that bore no resemblance to anything recorded in the official account books. This is where Solomon's arithmetic became dangerous. The operation worked as follows. Whitmore would extend what he termed generosity credit to neighboring landowners who were struggling, a common enough circumstance in the agricultural South, where a single bad harvest could destroy a generation's work. These loans were extended verbally, witnessed only by Whitmore's ledger clerk, and recorded in the official books at figures significantly lower than the actual amounts lent. When the loans came due, Whitmore would present a figure, verbally again, substantially higher than anything written. When challenged, he would produce the ledger. The ledger would show a different number. The ledger was, in all legal proceedings of the era, the only number that mattered. The difference between the 2 figures, what was actually owed and what was recorded, went somewhere, not into any account that bore Whitmore's name. Solomon had been listening through the study window for years. He had tracked 17 separate transactions between 1841 and 1847. He had memorized the dates, the names, the spoken figures, and the recorded figures. He had calculated, to the penny, the cumulative gap between what was said and what was written. By the autumn of 1847, that gap totaled $14,370. In present-day terms, approximately $560,000. But the money was not what had brought Solomon to the point of action. There were three specific events. Ada Clarke described all three. The clerk wrote them down. The first event, April 1846. A man named Thomas Reeves, a small farmer who had borrowed from Whitmore to survive a bad spring, arrived at the plantation house in the early morning, hat in hand, to explain that he could not meet the payment Whitmore was demanding. He had the written figure. He had tried, he said, to explain the discrepancy. Whitmore had him removed from the property. 3 weeks later, the Reeves farm was absorbed into Whitmore's land holdings through a legal proceeding that lasted 4 hours and was presided over by a judge who had himself borrowed from Whitmore the previous year. Ada Clarke had watched Thomas Reeves walk down the road away from the Whitmore house. She said, "He had the look of a man who had understood something for the first time, and the understanding had broken him." Solomon had watched from the field. He said nothing. He remembered everything. The second event, January 1848. A woman named Delia, 31 years old, who worked the field rows and had 3 children, the youngest of whom was 4, was accused by Whitmore's overseer of stealing from the plantation stores. The accusation was based on a discrepancy in the household inventory records. Those records were maintained by Whitmore's wife. Those records were, as Mercy could have testified if anyone had asked, wrong. Delia was punished. The word the official record uses is disciplined. Ada Clarke's testimony uses a different word. The clerk wrote it down. Delia's youngest child, 4 years old, stood at the edge of the yard and watched, and did not make a sound, because the child had learned, with the specific education that the plantation system delivered to its smallest inhabitants, that making a sound would make things worse. Solomon witnessed this, from 30 feet away, unable to move, unable to speak. Ada Clarke said, "I watched Solomon's face. I had never seen a man go that still on purpose." The third event, March 1848. This is the one that changed the calculation. Whitmore informed Solomon, through the overseer, because Whitmore rarely spoke directly to the people he owned unless it served a specific purpose, that Mercy was to be sold. Not because she had done anything wrong, because a plantation owner in Savannah, Georgia, whose wife had recently admired Mercy during a social call, had made Whitmore an offer. And the offer was good. And Harlan Whitmore was, above all things, a man who honored good arithmetic. The sale was scheduled for the following Saturday. Ada Clarke said Solomon received this information in the yard in front of her and stood without moving for a long time, the way a tree stands when the first crack has gone through it, but it hasn't fallen yet. Then he went to the kitchen house. He sat down across from Mercy. Ada Clarke does not record what they said to each other. She said she went away and did not listen. She said it was not something meant for anyone else. She said, "When I came back, Mercy was braiding her hair the way she did when she had made a decision. Solomon was gone." But here's what Ada Clarke couldn't have known in that moment. Solomon hadn't gone to do something desperate. He hadn't gone to confront anyone. He hadn't raised his voice or picked up anything that could be used as a weapon. He had gone to a place he'd been preparing for 7 years, and what he retrieved from that place would unravel everything Harlan Whitmore had built, not with violence, not yet, but with something Whitmore could not argue against, could not discredit, and could not survive: his own numbers. Before we reveal what Solomon had been hiding and how he used it, if this story is giving you chills, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button to help this channel surface these hidden histories. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Now, let's talk about what Solomon had been building for 7 years. Solomon had not memorized 17 transactions by accident. He had been writing them down, not in any place that could be found, not on paper which could be taken. He had, over the course of 7 years, carved a coded record into the interior wood panels of the small structure where he slept, a system of marks that to anyone who didn't know the key appeared to be the ordinary wear of an old building. The key was in his head. When he retrieved what he needed on that night in March of 1848, he was not retrieving a document, he was translating one, transferring 7 years of memory and carved notation into a single piece of paper, writing with charcoal from the kitchen fire on the back of a discarded invoice he had kept for exactly this purpose. He wrote for most of the night. What he produced was a comparison document, 2 columns side by side. The left column contained the figures as he had heard them spoken, dates, names, amounts. The right column contained the corresponding entries from Whitmore's official ledger, which Solomon had accessed precisely once in the spring of 1844, when Forsyth the clerk had left the study unlocked during an errand, and Solomon had walked in, memorized what he needed, and walked out in under 4 minutes. The gap between the 2 columns told a story that had only one possible interpretation. But a piece of paper with charcoal figures written by an enslaved man with no legal standing was not, in South Carolina in 1848, evidence of anything. Solomon knew this. This is why he needed a doctor. His name was Dr. Emmett Hargrove. He had practiced medicine in Charleston for 11 years and had, by 1848, built the particular kind of reputation that comes from being accurate, discreet, and willing to treat patients that other physicians refused, including, on 3 documented occasions, enslaved people brought to him after plantation injuries that their owners preferred not to report to anyone with medical training. Solomon had known about Dr. Hargrove for 2 years. He had thought carefully about what he needed from him and what he could offer in exchange. On the morning of Thursday, March 14, 1848, 4 days before Mercy was to be sold, Solomon appeared at Dr. Hargrove's office at 6 in the morning, before the first patient arrived, and asked the doctor's housekeeper to tell the doctor that a man named Solomon Gaines had information about a financial crime being committed by a church deacon against multiple property holders in the county, and that the man had 4 days to live before the information became irrelevant. Dr. Hargrove came to the door himself. Ada Clarke was not present for this conversation. She reconstructed it from what Solomon told her afterward and from what Dr. Hargrove wrote in his private medical journal, a document discovered in 1958 in a Charleston estate sale and now held in the same archive as the ledger. Dr. Hargrove's first journal entry about Solomon, dated March 14, 1848, reads, "A man arrived this morning whose self-possession under circumstances of extreme personal danger I have not seen equaled in 20 years of medicine. He laid a document before me with the careful attention of a man who has handled it many times in his mind before ever touching it with his hands. He did not ask me to believe him, he asked me to read." Solomon's document named Harlan Whitmore specifically. It named 11 of the 17 transactions he had tracked. It named the men who had been defrauded. It listed the figures, spoken and recorded, in precise parallel columns. And then it did something Dr. Hargrove had not anticipated. It listed the transactions in which Whitmore had used the profits from the fraudulent scheme to purchase human beings, specific purchases, specific dates, specific prices paid, including the purchase of Solomon himself in 1920 at age 7. Solomon had calculated, using the fraudulent profits that could be attributed to the years before and including 1920, that the money used to purchase him had come directly from the scheme. He was, in a narrow and devastating sense, the product of the crime itself. Dr. Hargrove wrote, "I sat with this document for a very long time. The man across from me said nothing while I read. When I finished, he said, 'The woman named Mercy is to be sold on Saturday. I need 4 days. I need a witness.' I asked him what he intended to do. He said, 'Collect what is owed.'" Solomon had the evidence. He had the witness. He had 4 days. What he did next was not what anyone expected, including Dr. Hargrove. Don't go anywhere. On the morning of Friday, March 17, 1848, one day before the scheduled sale, Dr. Emmett Hargrove arrived at the Whitmore plantation house in his professional capacity. He had sent a message the previous day explaining that he was conducting a voluntary survey of plantation health conditions in the county at the request of a medical committee, a committee that did not exist, but whose letterhead Dr. Hargrove had produced himself the previous evening using the press in his office. Harlan Whitmore received him with the particular cordiality reserved for professional men of standing. He offered coffee. He offered the sitting room. Dr. Hargrove accepted both. Solomon was summoned from the field, ostensibly to assist the doctor's examination of the plantation workers, a plausible reason that Whitmore accepted without question because it cost him nothing and because plantation health surveys occasionally produced documentation useful in trade negotiations. Whitmore did not find it notable that the doctor had specifically requested Solomon by name. The three of them were in Whitmore's study within the hour. Ada Clarke, who had been positioned near the study window, she does not explain how, only that Solomon had told her to be there, heard most of what followed through 4 inches of open window. Dr. Hargrove laid Solomon's document on Whitmore's desk. He said, and Ada Clarke remembered these words precisely 40 years later when asked, he said, "Mr. Whitmore, this man has asked me to be present as a medical and civic witness to a private financial matter. I've agreed. I ask only that you read what's in front of you before anyone speaks." Whitmore looked at the document. Ada Clarke said she could not see his face from the window, but she could see his hands. She said his hands went flat on the desk, pressing down as if he needed something solid beneath them. After a long silence, Whitmore said, "Where did you get this?" Solomon said, "I've been carrying it for 7 years." Whitmore said, "This is not legal." He meant Solomon's presence in this conversation, Solomon's document, Solomon's capacity to stand in a room and make a claim, all of it. None of it was legal. He was correct. Solomon said, "The numbers are." Another silence, longer. Then Solomon spoke for an uninterrupted period that Ada Clarke estimated at several minutes, and she was clear that it felt much longer than that. She said he spoke quietly, without anger, in the same measured tone she had heard him use when he was explaining something to a child who needed to understand it correctly. He laid out what he knew, transaction by transaction, date by date, name by name. He named Thomas Reeves, who had lost his farm. He named Delia, who had been punished for a theft that had not occurred. He named Mercy and the sale scheduled for the following morning. He named himself, his own purchase price, the year, and the source of the funds. And then he said this, which Dr. Hargrove recorded in his journal verbatim. "I have not come to ask you for my freedom. I have not come to ask you for Mercy's freedom. I have come to tell you that what is in that document is going to 11 men in this county by Monday morning. men whose names are on those pages, men who have resources and lawyers and who will want to know what happened to their money. Dr. Hargrove has agreed to deliver it. He will do so regardless of what happens in this room. The only thing you can decide today is whether mercy stays and whether you do what you do next, quietly or loudly." Ada Clarke said the silence after that lasted long enough that a mockingbird outside the window went through an entire sequence of calls before anyone spoke. Whitmore said, "You're threatening me." Solomon said, "I'm collecting a debt." What happened next is the part of Ada Clarke's testimony that the district court sealed immediately upon receiving it. Dr. Hargrove's journal is less circumspect. He wrote, "Whitmore rose from his chair. I cannot record what he said in this journal with any comfort. I will record only that he moved toward Solomon in a manner that made his intention clear. Solomon did not move. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on Whitmore's face, and there was something in the quality of his stillness that stopped Whitmore as surely as a wall. I have seen men face danger in my years of medicine. I have never seen anyone face it with that particular quality of absolute readiness combined with absolute calm. Whitmore stopped. Ada Clarke said, "Solomon said one more thing. He said, 'The document is already copied. There are 2 copies I have not given Dr. Hargrove. You don't know where they are.'" This was not true. There was only the one document in Dr. Hargrove's coat. But Solomon didn't know that, and Solomon had calculated, with the precision he had applied to every other number in this room, that Whitmore was a man who had spent his entire life avoiding risk he couldn't quantify. A man who would not, when presented with an unknown variable he could not verify or eliminate, choose the option that made things worse. He was right. Whitmore sat back down. The sale of Mercy was canceled that afternoon. But here is what Ada Clarke did not know until years later. Dr. Hargrove delivered the document on Monday morning, not to 11 men, to one, a lawyer named Clement Barrow, who represented 4 of the named parties and who had, as it happened, a personal grievance against Whitmore dating to 1839 that he had been unable to act on without evidence of a pattern. The pattern was now in his hands. Whitmore was not prosecuted. This is South Carolina in 1848, and the courts were not designed for this particular outcome. But the civil proceedings that followed over the next 18 months resulted in the liquidation of approximately a third of his land holdings, the collapse of his credit arrangements with 3 Charleston banks, and his quiet removal from the deaconship of First Calvary Baptist Church, the official reason given as health concerns. He died in 1953. The official record lists the cause as heart failure. Solomon and Mercy were not freed, not immediately, not through any single act of legal recognition. What happened to them next, and what it cost Solomon, is the part of this story that Dr. Hargrove could not reconcile. We'll tell you. Stay with us. Solomon and Mercy remained on the Whitmore plantation through the legal proceedings. They were not sold. This was, in the context of 1848 South Carolina, the outcome Solomon had negotiated and received. Ada Clarke said, "He never called it winning, he called it collecting." In 1850, as Whitmore's financial situation continued to deteriorate, a portion of the plantation, including the structures where Solomon and Mercy lived, was sold to a Quaker family from Pennsylvania named Aldred, who had relocated to South Carolina 2 years earlier for reasons that were not entirely agricultural. The Aldred family manumitted 16 people in the first year of their ownership. Solomon and Mercy were among them. The paperwork was filed in the Charleston District Court on September 3, 1850. Solomon was 37 years old. Mercy was 32. They had been together in the particular way that two people can belong to each other within a system designed to prevent them from belonging to anything for 3 years. They left South Carolina in the winter of 1850. The direction they went is not recorded in any document Ada Clarke had access to. She said she knew, but she chose not to include it in her testimony, and the clerk did not press her. She said, "Some things belong to the people they happen to." Dr. Emmett Hargrove continued his practice in Charleston until 1861, when the war made his position there untenable. He relocated to Philadelphia, where he practiced for another 12 years. His private medical journal, the one that records the events of March 1848, was kept in a locked box in his study from 1848 until his death in 1973. He left it to his daughter with a single instruction: "Don't open this for 40 years. The people in it deserve some peace before their history." His daughter honored the instruction. The journal was opened in 1913. His final entry about Solomon's case was written in the spring of 1848, a few weeks after the sale was canceled and the document delivered. It is not long. "I have spent 11 years practicing medicine in this city, and I thought I understood, at a professional distance, what the system operating around me produced in human terms. I understood nothing. I sat in that room and watched a man use patience and arithmetic and 7 years of silent, meticulous planning to do what courts and laws and churches could not or would not do. And I understood for the first time what it costs a person to live inside a system that requires this level of ingenuity merely to keep the people they love from being sold. The cost is everything. It is every year of youth spent calculating instead of resting. It is every ordinary moment converted into a resource. It is a kind of intelligence that should never have been necessary and that the world never acknowledged. I am a physician. I am supposed to diagnose what is wrong and prescribe a remedy. I looked at Solomon Gaines and understood I could not have done what he did, not in 50 years of trying." He closed the entry with 4 words: "He was owed more." Ada Clarke gave her testimony in 1851. She was 11 years old, and she remembered everything with the clarity of a child who understood, even as she lived through it, that she was watching something worth remembering exactly. The court sealed it immediately upon receiving it. The document was classified as a matter of civil litigation, its contents restricted, its witness unnamed in the official index. It remained sealed for 111 years. The ledger is held today in the South Carolina Historical Society archive. Harlan Whitmore's signature appears on every page. Dr. Cecilia Marsh, the archivist who first examined it in 1962, spent 11 years cross-referencing its entries against county land records, court filings, bank records, and the civil proceedings of 1848 to 1850. Her findings were published in a monograph in 1974 that circulated primarily among historians of Southern economic history. The monograph names Solomon. It reconstructs what he did. It verifies, through independent documentary evidence, that the figures in his comparison document were accurate to within a margin of error so small it could only be explained by direct, sustained observation over many years. Marsh wrote in her introduction, quote, "What Solomon Gaines accomplished required a quality of mind that we would, in any other context, recognize immediately as exceptional. We name it here because the official record refused to." No record survives of where Solomon and Mercy went in the winter of 1850. No record survives of whether they built something in a new place, a house, a life, An ordinary Tuesday morning with coffee going cold and no one watching. No record was required to. Some things belong to the people they happened to. If you held that ledger in your hands, 41 pages of someone else's crime, compiled in silence over 7 years by a man the law said owned nothing, would you understand what it cost to build it? If this investigation moved you, share it with someone who should hear it. Hit like to help this channel surface the histories that were sealed and never meant to be found. Subscribe. We release one deep investigation every week. Next week, an Indiana orphanage, 1863. No child ever aged past 10. The records were sealed for 80 years. We've opened them. The ledger survived. The man who built the case against it did too.